Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. In an exclusive interview to ANI, a news agency which was carried by all the media outlets in India on New Year's Day, Modi said that India has had a consistent policy of seeking dialogue with Pakistan. That said, according to Modi, it would be, and I quote, a huge mistake to believe that Pakistan would mend its ways anytime soon. He also said that his government is working out various strategies to keep the pressure up on Islamabad, again to quote, to check terrorism, unquote. We have witnessed many changes in the politics and social ideological configuration in India since the arrival on the scene of the Modi government. Even Indian analysts believe that this is a government that takes its ideological cues from the ultra-right-wing RSS. The media and independent journalists have come under increasing pressure to tone down their criticism. We've also seen violent vigilante behavior on the issues of Gav Raksha and Ghar Wapsi campaigns. The first relates to protecting cows and the second to force Muslims into converting to Hinduism. This is what a former justice of the Indian Supreme Court has to say about the plight of Muslims in India at this point in time. Listen to this.
हमारे संविधान में आर्टिकल 19(1)(b) है जो कहता है कि all citizens have the right to peacefully assemble without arms. तो ये उस संविधान की धारा का घोर उल्लंघन है भाई. तमाम मैंने देखा आरएसएस की शाखाएं होती हैं पार्क्स में यहाँ वहाँ, उस पर तो कोई प्रतिबंध नहीं, उनको तो कोई परमिशन नहीं लेनी पड़ती है. और फ्राइडे की नमाज 45 मिनट या 1 घंटे होती है. इसमें क्या इतराज़ है? कोई नमाज अगर पढ़ ले तो किसी का सर काट लिया, किसी का पैर काट लिया, कर रहे करने दो, जिसको आज़ादी होनी चाहिए. तो ये तो बिल्कुल गलत आदेश हुआ है.
This was Justice Markande Kachu, who was talking about the plight of Muslims. Occupied Kashmir is another story where state oppression has reached horrific proportions, even as the alienation of Kashmiris from the Indian state is near complete. What exactly is happening in India? What should we in Pakistan expect in the run-up to Indian general elections? Would the BJP under Modi, were it to return to power, rethink its policy of engaging Pakistan, or will we see more of the same? To discuss this, we have with us Fahad Hussain, Director News and Current Affairs, Express TV, and Editor of Express Tribune, Hassan Javed, Assistant Professor of Political Science at LUMS, and we will also be joined later by other panelists. So let me begin with Hassan Javed. What do you think of what's happening in India? One of the senses generally is that Pakistan, which went through this kind of groundswell and is now trying to claw its way back to where it began, what we see in India is that what was known as quote-unquote secular India is increasingly becoming Hindu Rashtra India. Is that sense correct?
Well, certainly since the early 1990s and the gradual decline of Congress hegemony in India, we have seen this tendency within India for the rise of these ultra-nationalist right-wing Hindutva forces to filling that vacuum. And certainly this Modi government over the past half-decade or so has demonstrated exactly what the logical conclusion of that descent into right-wing Hindutva represents in India. I mean, there have been a number of books and articles written on this as well about the increasing persecution faced by minorities amidst this rise of the BJP and right-wing forces in India since the 1990s. It's abundantly clear that if you belong to a religious minority in India, if you belong to a community that doesn't agree with this or acquiesce to this mainstream Hindutva ideology, you are likely to be marginalized and discriminated against. And as you were saying earlier, there's also more recently evidence to suggest that for all its democratic credentials, we're seeing a crackdown on the press, we're seeing a crackdown on dissent in India, which perhaps had not been the case which would not have been the case a few decades ago. So certainly, I think there is some merit to the idea that India, which was envisaged as this kind of secular state, has slowly diverted away from that vision. It's becoming a much more intolerant, much more right-wing place than it was in the past. And it'd be interesting to discuss why that is and where that's likely to go in the future.
So Fahad, one of the things that people generally talk about, especially the intelligentsia in India, was that secularism, because it's a congery of nations and there's so much diversity in India, that if you do not have secularism as some kind of glue, this will come apart. Now, this is precisely where Modi government has been consistently hitting. I mean, and the RSS is the thin end of the wedge.
Very true. And I think what we are seeing is an unraveling of the dream that began in 2014 as far as BJP was concerned, because Modi ascended power promising jobs, promising growth, promising a new resurgent India and a new hope for the middle classes. This is despite the fact that, he had that stain of Gujarat on him.
Yes.
But 4 years later, clearly he is in trouble because, people have realized that all those promises that he had made, all those very colorful things that he had painted, they haven't come about. But the more dangerous thing from their point of view, and I emphasize their point of view, not our point of view, because ours is completely different, is the actual unraveling of the concept of India that has been promoted in the last 70 years. And I think the way that they are going into this election is the way that Modi has divided India on sectarian basis is actually ungluing what you were referring to. And I think Al Jazeera in a report very recently said that this could possibly be the most important election in India's history, because if Modi does win again with a thumping majority, that is going to create cracks in India which are going to be very difficult to put back. So it's like Humpty Dumpty.
But I mean, given the state elections and the results, do you think that Modi and BJP under Modi is likely to return to power with a thumping majority? Well,
thumping may be, not the correct word, but and we know that, with the defeats in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan and in Chhattisgarh, which was a big blow to BJP and a huge boost to the Congress. Now, we know that Congress is now desperately looking for allies. They want to have a big coalition to go in for the elections. Perhaps it's a little too early to write off Modi.
Okay.
I think what we can safely say is that it's unlikely that he would come back with the kind of majority that he came back with. It may be safe to say that BJP may still emerge as the largest single party, but then that would mean a hung parliament, that would mean coalition making, and that would mean a question mark over whether BJP and Modi can actually come back and form a government.
So we have a view from the other side, and Mandra Nair, who's a journalist at The Week, and also the granddaughter of the late Mr. Kuldeep Nair, one of the most consistent advocates of peace and normal relations between India and Pakistan. Welcome to the program, Ms. Nair. The sense that something is ideologically changing in India, although the constitution is in place and that constitution actually talks about a secular India, but at the ground level, things have been changing. Is that your sense also?
Well, I think every country has its problems. I think there has been a resurgence of right-wing forces which exist in every country. Extremism exists in Pakistan. It exists in America. So I don't think that we could actually write off pluralism or the idea of India completely. I think there is a certain nationalistic sentiment which is across the world. I don't think it's particular to India. Having said that, that's it, and we're in election year, so.
Okay, you're right. I mean, there is extremism. Before you joined us, we were talking about the fact that we saw this in Pakistan, and we have over the years been making lots of efforts to sort of roll this back. But just as we're trying to go back to where we began, and we want to get back to having a Pakistan which is, of course, secure for the minorities and other disadvantaged groups. What we have seen in India post-2014 is a government that takes its ideological cue from the RSS, and that is perhaps also a difference between Prime Minister Modi and the late Prime Minister Vajpayee.
Well, I'm not a political journalist, so I really can't comment on the government and RSS and its relationship. Having said that, I think that it would be sort of simplistic to believe that the relationship is just a binary. I mean, it's one and together. I do think that there are differences between the RSS and the government. However, the BJP is in power. I think there are serious differences about education and how the RSS sees education and how the government sees education. So I wouldn't think that it's fair to just say that it would have been completely RSS-led. Having said that, I do not cover the BJP and 5% comment, but that is true. I mean, the RSS and the BJP are two different identities. Even if you do see there would be certain commonalities of whatever. I mean, the RSS is not in government. The BJP is.
Yeah, that's correct. Hassan Javed, what would you say about what Ms. Nair is saying?
Again, I mean, I don't think it, I agree with the idea that there's this kind of wave of right-wing nationalism sweeping the world. And I think there's a certain commonality of causes. There's widespread discontent about jobs, about economic security in a rapidly changing world. And certainly the BJP in its rise to power has to a very large extent been a middle-class phenomenon with middle-class aspirations about sovereignty, about self-respect, and about economic security driving the rise of these parties. And Modi, in my opinion, and I may be wrong, but in my opinion, very much styles himself as that kind of right-wing populist. So it's not a problem that's unique to India. I think the key point is what you were saying earlier, that in a way this has been accompanied by a retreat from the kind of secular and pluralistic vision that underpinned India at the time of partition and which arguably was in place for many years after partition as well. The BJP and the RSS are two different political entities. There's no denying that. But in a sense, what we see happening with the BJP is something that we see happening with similar parties around the world, a mainstreaming of ideas that would have been considered to be the extreme a decade ago or 2 decades ago. It's not the RSS and the BJP are different entities, but the BJP has ended up mainstreaming a lot of ideas that would have in a previous generation been considered to be exclusively the preserve of the most extremist parties. And again, as you were mentioning, when we look at instances of forced conversion, when we look at the role Modi played in the Gujarat riots almost a decade and a half ago, it's clear to see that the people in charge of the party right now are perhaps not cut from the same cloth as those who would have championed a vision of a more pluralistic and secular India a generation ago.
Okay, let me place this in a broader framework. Would you say that what's happening is also about what we have seen, the neoliberal civilizing projects crisis, not just in India, but elsewhere also? Pankaj Mishra, of course, talks about it with reference to India and with reference to India's oppression in Kashmir. Do you think that partly this has to do with the fact that the neoliberal elites and the intelligentsia really failed to reach out to the people at the ground level?
I do think that's the case, and not just in India. I mean, I think that globalization, as we all know, has created winners and losers. And for the past 2 decades or 3 decades around the world, the winners have been part of a relatively small economic elite, controlling the levers of international capital, at the head of major corporations, in bed with business and the development sector, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's been a small number of winners, so there's been a tremendous amount of growth, but the fruits of that growth haven't really been distributed in an equitable way, really anywhere in the world. And I think that's the fallout that we've seen kind of taking shape in the form of the Modi government in India as well. I mean, I think back to, the 2005 election in India when the BJP was defeated despite having the slogan of India shining. Because despite tremendous growth, hundreds of millions of people were being left behind. And I think that's a mistake that many continue to make today. I mean, they see the rise of these right-wing populists and they think the solution is to talk about pluralism.
Absolutely, that's the sense. Yeah, that's the sense everywhere. Thank you so much. That was Hassan Javed, who teaches political science at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, giving us his perspective on what's happening in India. We are joined now by Dr. Mohammad Faisal, who is the spokesperson at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Faisal, thank you so much. You have been briefing the media on what's happening at the line of control. Of course, there was also a day march issued to the Indian High Commissioner. Where exactly are the relations standing? And is there any hope that post India's general elections, there's likely to be a difference in strategy, or are we going to see more of the same?
Thank you very much. Pakistan has made its position very clear. You would remember that the Prime Minister, before he before the elections, he had said that if India takes one step, Pakistan will take two. In that spirit, the Prime Minister wrote to Prime Minister Modi on 14th of September, and he outlined a clear roadmap on how to move forward in Pakistan-India relations. The letter which the media has seen included, of course, the resolution of Jammu and Kashmir dispute, Siachen and Sir Creek. It also included terrorism. It also reiterated the invite to the Indian Prime Minister for the SAARC summit, and also said that we may begin the dialogue once the Indian Prime Minister visits Pakistan. As you would remember, the Indians agreed to it the very next day, and then about 18 hours later, they backtracked and they said, no, the meeting between the two foreign ministers can't be held in New York at the sidelines of UN General Assembly. So that was a setback for the efforts of government of Pakistan to move forward with India. But we persevered despite that. And in November, we were able to achieve the groundbreaking of the Kartarpur corridor, which was a big gesture. And already work has started on our side. There's a bridge to be built, actually two bridges and a 4-kilometer road and some details. Actively work is going on this. But I think that because of the domestic compulsions and the elections coming up in May in India, they don't have a clarity on how to move forward with Pakistan. We, however, stand by the letter that we have sent in September, and let's see how things proceed.
So some would say that there is a lot of clarity in India, and that is also going by what Prime Minister Modi in an interview to ANI news agency said, that they're going to keep the pressure up on Islamabad. So apparently there is a strategy. But before you joined us, one other issue that we were debating had to do with the difference in style and content of two BJP governments, one the current one and one which was led by the late Atal Bihari Vajpayee. As a seasoned diplomat and as also someone who's Director General South Asia, would you agree that there is a difference in these two BJP governments in terms of style and content and engagement with Pakistan and the rest of the region?
Okay. Regarding the first point, I would like to say that there is a lack of clarity in India.
Okay.
That is why they agree to the meeting of foreign ministers and then backtrack.
Okay.
They agree to Kartarpur, but they send two ministers, but the foreign minister doesn't come. Mm-hmm. So they have a lot of problems when they want to deal with Pakistan, perhaps it's because of the elections. Mm-hmm. As you know better than me, that India does not figure in our elections. Mm. We have corruption, we have governance, administration, other things, but nothing about India. But Pakistan is a big factor in their elections, and that reflects in their foreign policy. I wouldn't be, correct if I try to compare the two governments, but the style is different. Mm-hmm. This government is more right-wing, and hence the lack of clarity. They have taken positions that they are not able to deliver upon. Mm-hmm. And that is why they take one step forward and two backwards.
Okay.
And that is why we have to, we can't really move forward with them on anything.
Okay. That was Dr. Mohammad Faisal. Thank you so much. He's our spokesperson at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let me just go back to Mandra Nair once again. you heard what Dr. Faisal said. Is there clarity in how the Modi government wants to deal with Pakistan, or is there lack of clarity? What is your sense about this, moving forward and then, stepping back?
I would like to believe that actually the policy hasn't changed very much between the last BJP government and this, or even the Congress government and this government. If you hear Modi's interview, he says that neither the NDA nor the UPA opposed talks, which is true. And I think that the policy between India and Pakistan goes beyond an interview. You've said that India has a lack of clarity. I think that it was pretty, the Kartarpur corridor, there were two ministers, they were both union ministers. One was from Punjab, where of course the project is taking place. She was, she was an Akali minister, as well as the minister who used to be a diplomat who was sent. So I don't see, the foreign minister not going as anyway as a backtracking thing. I think
no, but here's the thing. Here's the thing, Mandara. The thing is, as you know, this entire Kartarpur Sahib issue came up during the swearing-in ceremony of Prime Minister Imran Khan. And when Sidhu went back, he was viciously attacked on various TV channels in India. And then at that point in time, the central government wasn't particularly interested in taking this up. But after a gap of 2 or 3 months, when there was a certain groundswell of Sikh sentiment, that's when they decided that they're perhaps going to reciprocate. Yeah. And interestingly enough, as you know, this thing happened without any formal agreement. And what we have seen between India and Pakistan is that even where we have formally agreed to things, the two sides might not observe the written word. And so this Kartarpur Sahib thing is somewhat of an aberration, so to speak.
1 second, I would like to clarify a few things. Firstly, the Kartarpur corridor has been pending since Vajpayee's visit to Pakistan, the big Lahore Yatra. Having said that, I think that Modi's 2015 visit to Pakistan was as landmark as Vajpayee's. So I would like to say that in terms of policy, nothing between India and Pakistan has changed. Every Indian Prime Minister believes they're going to be the one to bring in peace. I don't think if you look at policy itself, post Hamid Ansari release of Pakistan released Hamid Ansari, we released 2 other people. There was on January 1st, and in exchange of the nuclear installations, we've talked about
some of those things always happen because, of course, those are things that have been worked out by the Sherpas.
Yeah, true. But policy is determined by governments, not politicians. And I would also like to argue that India does not come into India is not a factor in Pakistan elections. The PTI said Modi ka yaar hai gaddar hai. So I mean, there is a certain
that slogan also trust me on this because I work as a journalist in Pakistan and I can tell you that India has never really been an issue during our national elections. But thank you so much for giving us your time and your perspective on Indian internal situation also and India-Pakistan relations also. Fahad Hussain, there's clearly a sense that from the interview also that the Modi-Doval duo has a certain policy of non-engagement. Now, the point that Mandara was raising about Modi's visit to Pakistan, the actual facts behind that visit, and these are facts that can be corroborated from Sartaj Sahib and Tariq Fatmi Sahib and others who were there, that there was no invitation. Modi actually forced his way into Pakistan. This was simply to be part of then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's, the wedding ceremony that was going on, her granddaughter's. So there was no agenda for that meeting. So that meeting has to be kept very different from a proper meeting like the Vajpayee meeting to Lahore.
Although it did create problems domestically.
Precisely.
In a number of ways.
Precisely. Yeah. So what is your sense that to me, it seems like the policy of non-engagement is a policy and there is clarity in it.
I think there is no ambiguity as far as Modi is concerned. Also because I think their calculation is that this policy of non-engagement, this policy of aggressive neglect is something that they can sell to the domestic audience. I think they're using Pakistan as a punching bag. They're also using Pakistan as a bogey for the elections. So at some point in time, this policy of non-engagement will run its course. It is not something that can sustain itself. It is not something which is conducive to bilateral relations. India is our neighbor. We need to engage. It doesn't mean that we need to be soft.
How does one do it if the other side is not reciprocating?
I don't think it should be unilateral. If Pakistan should not at any stage be seen as a country which is dying to engage with them. So as long as Mr. Modi thinks that he can play this game, I think two can play it too. But it is an unsustainable policy. And I think as far as the world is concerned, they may say whatever they want to, but I think everybody understands that Modi is using Pakistan as a political ploy to win domestic brownie points. And the lack of engagement will last as long as their political temperature is high. Once it settles down, once the elections are done, I think we might see some change of track.
You think that there's going to be something, because you see, there's one other very important factor in all this, and that is occupied Kashmir. And what we have seen in occupied Kashmir, and we have just been joined by Mohammed Faisal, who's a Kashmiri journalist, works at TRT World and is based in Istanbul, so I'll go to him, but I just want to get your perspective on this. It seems to me that it has reached a point, the oppression has reached a point where even normally, I won't say pro-India, but US newspapers that are sympathetic to India, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other newspapers, are also forced to acknowledge the fact that when you reach a point where the civilians are placing themselves between the security forces and the freedom fighters and losing their lives happily, then the alienation that I was talking about is not just near complete, it is complete.
I think there is no doubt about that. I think that threshold has been crossed for a number of reasons, one of which is the way that the Modi government has behaved towards Kashmir. That is definitely not the only reason, but it has made the whole situation much more conducive for a complete alienation of the Kashmiri population. I think what Modi has been able to achieve is something which no Indian Prime Minister would like to be credited for.
Yeah, that's
which
true.
is that they have pushed Kashmiris to a place where I think it's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, for them to come back.
I'll come back to that. I'm just going to pull in Faisal on this and then go to a break. But we'll come back and we'll talk about Kashmir also, and we'll talk about demonetization also. Faisal, thank you so much for being on the program, as always. What is your sense? We were talking about the societal and ideological changes that are happening in India, from the perhaps what could be called a secular India, which is a glue of sorts because it's so diverse, to an India which is where, you know, vigilante groups talk about Gau Raksha and Ghar Wapsi and the rest of it. So, of course, there is oppression in Kashmir, but it seems to us that even the Muslim population in mainland India is under grave threat from the ultra right-wing RSS types. Is that correct?
Well, you know, in India, minorities have always borne the brunt of the state sometimes, and mostly the ultra-nationalist groups in the BJP, the RSS, and their allies. So if you can go back to the 90s when the Babri Masjid happened, that was the turning point in the whole idea of India, where this religious intolerance and secularism was put on stake by not just the political parties, but also by the Indian civil society. And Narendra Modi's win in 2014 was the culmination of that journey that BJP took to use a populist movement and polarize the society to gain power. because India is a majority Hindu state, so they believe that by whipping up anti-Muslim and anti-Pakistan sentiments, anti-Kashmir sentiments as well, they would be able to gain a lot of the larger pie in the voting share. And if we see in 2014 what happened, BJP won with a landslide victory. And that is not just because of Congress's scam-ridden government, but it's also because how the BJP used Hindutva politics as their main election campaign promise. And if you can see 4 years later, after seeing that it is not enough, they are trying to whip up the sentiments again to further polarize the Indian society. And what has happened in 2014, a lot of civil society activists who would call themselves secular came out of the closet and professed themselves to also be part of this whole Hindu nationalist movement. One of the biggest journalists, Veer Sanghvi, said, Modi may be a mass murderer, but he is our mass murderer, over US denying visa to Modi before he was elected as the prime minister. So definitely there has been a shift in the Indian society. It began in the 90s and it's reached its peak now. But the problem is that communal polarization cannot satisfy people who are also in poverty, who also seek jobs, who also want development. So they are trying to strike a balance, but they have failed in the last 4 years. Development and communalization cannot work at the same time.
That's a very important point. I have to take a break. At the other end of the break, we'll have Fahad Hussain and Mohammad Faisal with us to further look at where India stands and what are the prospects of India-Pakistan normalization or engagement. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. We're discussing India's internal changes, especially the societal, ideological changes, and also the prospects of normalization or engagement between India and Pakistan. Fahad Hussain, before I let go of you, tell me, you said that there are chances that after the elections, there's likely to be some kind of engagement. What makes you say that? Because the reason I ask this is that somehow the Modi government thinks that its current policy of disengagement and putting pressure on Islamabad through various means is working. Now, whether it's working or not, that's a separate debate. But if they believe that it's working and they return to power, then the likelihood is that they'll continue with it.
See, it also depends on how they return to power. If they just scrape through, it's going to be different. If they campaign on an anti-Pakistan tone very aggressively,
which they are already doing.
Yeah, which they are doing. And if they feel that they get a kind of a response from their electorate, which means that their voter is basically endorsing that line, then obviously in the immediate aftermath of the elections, in case they do win, it is unlikely that a dialogue process or any softening or any engagement is going to happen. But my point is a larger point, which is that they may want to stick with it, but the way things are happening, the way this region is aligning, I don't think that that's a policy that they can sustain for a long time. I think they're going to try and extract maximum juice that they can out of it. They can perhaps sell this policy to their voter, but they can't sell this policy to the world. It's difficult.
So diminishing returns. But quickly, Trump yesterday said that he wants to have good relations with Pakistan. Trump has also written a letter, requested facilitation in Afghanistan and the rest of it. So we've got an opening there. There are also relations with Iran. So would you say that what's happening in the region elsewhere for Pakistan, with things looking up, are going to start bringing diminishing returns to India's policy sooner than later?
It absolutely will if we can play our cards right. I think Afghanistan is opening up. There's a golden opportunity for us. The stars are aligning. We can either do what we normally do, which is basically muck up, or we can, for a change, take the right steps and utilize that opening that is coming. So if Afghanistan does open up in the right way for us, that would automatically mean a bit of a squeeze for India.
Yeah.
Plus, with the, the sort of lengthening shadows of China and Russia over the region, perhaps...
I like that term, the lengthening shadows. Yeah. That's very literary.
Thank you. A possible receding of the US influence. I think overall in the next couple of years, I think India would also be reading their tea leaves properly and stop being so obstinate with us.
So if Congress manages to, let's say if Congress doesn't come to power, but has a sizable majority in terms of being the opposition, that will also create problems for the BJP in terms of its policy towards Pakistan.
It would, because I think the policy of Congress is not as belligerent. Their policy has other problems, but it's not overtly belligerent as BJP is. So I think that pressure will be on. And I think Congress has been calling out in terms of, making Pakistan a bogeyman for everything that BJP wants to do. So I think there would be a certain level of moderation. But there is also another element to it, Ejaz, and that is that if BJP does come into power with a thumping majority, they may not engage with us. But in many ways, they're going to end up having the kind of impact on India, which we may not find too unconducive to our interests.
That's a very interesting thought. Thank you so much, Faz Hussain. Faz Hussain was talking to us about giving us his perspective on India's societal and ideological changes and also the prospects of normalization and engagement between India and Pakistan. So I go to Faisal. Faisal, you said something very interesting. And that is something which Pankaj Mishra has also talked about in terms of the failure of the neoliberal project and also the fact that even secular India had this civilizing project in occupied Kashmir, and he refers to it on the basis of his journalistic assignments in the late 80s and early 90s in occupied Kashmir. So it seems to me that no matter what happens, whether it's the Congress or the BJP, as far as this civilizing project is concerned, that will continue unabated. Would you agree with my assessment?
Well, both BJP and Congress have similar policy when it comes to Kashmir. It's like it's like a red line that both parties cannot cross. So if BJP, which in my calculation will come back in power in New Delhi, the thing is that even if BJP tries to go away from its hard policy on Kashmir, the Congress might make it even more difficult for them to give them a room to maneuver when it comes to talking to Kashmiri leadership. So that is something that has remained constant over the years. When Congress is in power, BJP opposes it. And when BJP is in power, Congress kind of opposes that too. But definitely in Kashmir, what we are seeing right now with the way how BJP has, created an institutional anarchy in Kashmir, it is not helpful for the people, and it's not also helpful for in the long run when it comes to the negotiation of Kashmir. Because if the BJP takes a hawkish position, it will be difficult for them to come to a moderate position.
So let me just go to Om Prakash Shah, who's a journalist in India based in Calcutta, or as it is now called Kolkata. Thank you for being on the program, Mr. Shah. We were talking about the societal and ideological changes that have generally been seen since the arrival on the scene of Prime Minister Modi and his government. There's also been stories about increasing pressure on journalists and also other writers who are generally considered to be critical of the government and also critical of the RSS project. Is that sense correct?
A lot of people don't agree with the present policy of the government of India, but they express, both the leaders of the opposition political parties as well as the intellectuals, the activists and the media persons. The press is by and large free in India.
Okay. So what we hear in terms of the pressure on journalists, is that fake news, or is that something that is of concern, even though lots of critical people still continue to write?
I would say press by and large in India is free and it plays its role effectively. Obviously, the government of, they would like press to be more, is not so critical. They won't like the press to be so critical. But the press in India is absolutely free.
Okay.
There is a section of media which is pro-government. There is a section of media which is anti-government.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That was O.P. Shah talking to us, who said that press is absolutely free in India. Faisal, as a Kashmiri and also as a journalist, would you agree with this assessment that since the arrival on the scene of Prime Minister Modi and his government, there is not pressure on the media and people are free to write as they will?
Well, India ranks 138 on the Press Freedom Index in the world. So that goes to show the claims of India in press being free in India. There is a lot of coterie of Indian television and newspapers which are basically run by the BJP, which are basically BJP mouthpieces. In fact, in Kashmir last year, Kamran Yusuf, a photojournalist, was arrested for over a year. And one of my close friends, Asif Sultan, is in prison for the last 6 months for writing a profile on Burhan Wani. And his crime was that he did not disclose his sources, which is a journalistic ethic.
Correct.
So for the last 6-7 months, he is in prison. And there's absolutely no gumption of a fact that in India, press is not free, especially not free in a place like Kashmir.
Okay, stay with me, Faisal. We've also been joined by Rashmi Saxena, the journalist and author of She Goes to War, stories about women militants in India. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Saxena. Give us a sense of this book that you wrote. What was the prompt? What exactly were you trying to do in terms of your research and what you put out in the book? I haven't read the book, but I've read some very good reviews of your book.
Oh, thank you so much. But let me tell you that this book had been in my mind for some time. It's just that since I was still reporting and active in journalism, you get caught up in your daily assignments and there isn't enough time to research. But this book had been in my mind for, say, almost 10 to 12 years. And I never got down to it. But, when I took a break from reporting, I decided to research this. And I found it was so difficult to get across to women who actually had been part of insurgencies. And the point which I was trying to make in my book, and I hope I've been able to put it across, is that women who take up the arm, who take up the gun, are actually, in a way, also victims of living in a conflict zone. And my book covers various insurgencies in various parts of my country, right from Kashmir to, this is not a political book, so we are not getting into the terminology of whether it is a resistance movement, it's an insurgency, is it a terrorist thing. We are talking about women who have taken up the gun for whatever reason they feel is right.
Okay.
And the idea of the book is to talk about how women actually don't take it up as a first option. It's not an option they love.
Okay, so yeah, that's right. That's what the reviews also say. So there are a number of areas in India where there are insurgencies. There's also the issue of Kashmir, which is, of course, disputed territory. Do you get a sense that Delhi, since the arrival on the scene of Prime Minister Modi, has chalked out any viable policies in terms of reaching out to people, insurgents in various parts of Indian mainland and also in the disputed region of Kashmir?
Let me tell you, let's start with the first point that, as you said, it's a disputed area as far as Pakistan is concerned. Indian government...
No, it's also as far as the Kashmiris are concerned.
No, listen, can I just complete, please?
Sure, sure. No, I was just making a clarification that the Kashmiris also.
No, clarification I want to make is in the context of how the Indian governments have been looking at it. So as far as they are concerned, it's not a disputed area. So they look at it as a disturbed area.
Okay.
And we hear more about the movement in Kashmir than we hear of what is happening in other parts like the Northeast, Chhattisgarh, Andhra Pradesh. Now, these are all insurgency-affected areas.
Correct.
You know, of course, there is, and to say that only Kashmir has a political connotation would be really wrong. Because, you know, all these other areas also, you know, like, for example, Nagaland, where accord is being worked out, they have also been asking for independence.
Correct.
You know, and they have also been taking support of other countries vis-a-vis getting arms as well as training. The same can be said about the Maoists, you know, who have been in Andhra Pradesh and then now infiltrated and taken up a large swath of the land in Madhya Pradesh, in Chhattisgarh, basically. So, you know, when you say, has the government been trying to reach out to them? Yes, various governments, not only the BJP government, not only Atal Bihari Vajpayee, but even the Congress-led governments, they've all tried to make an attempt to reach out and reach accords. But it doesn't happen, you know. The Nagaland Accord has been there hanging fire for decades now, you know.
Correct.
So how are they actually, now the question maybe is, how are they trying to deal with them? Now they have a two-pronged way of looking at insurgencies in India. One, to see them purely as a law and order problem, which is, you know, where the paramilitary forces, the police, and as well as the army come into it. Yeah. The other is to try and deal with it also politically. Now, whether they have been successful on both these scores is a debatable point. But the attempt has definitely been there.
The attempt has been made. Thank you so much. That was Rashmi Saxena talking to us about how Delhi deals with this. Back to Faisal. Faisal, you heard Rashmi Saxena. There are, of course, so many conflict zones in India, but since they are not disputed, we don't talk about them. But Kashmir being a disputed territory, and Ms. Saxena said that it's not a disputed territory as far as the Indian government is concerned, that it's a disputed territory only for Pakistan. Give me a sense of what Kashmiris think, what it is.
It's a colonized territory. I mean, it's an occupation, military occupation. That's what every Kashmiri says. And even international newspapers over the years have, even recently, they have been calling it a military occupation because nowhere in the world there's a disturbed area where there are 500,000 troops, along with the police and the SOGs, with a government that is deemed to be proxy of the Indian state. So it's very unique, uniquely disturbed area for Indians, but it actually, for a lot of Kashmiris who I know and who also for international news agencies, they call it a militarized zone, an occupation. So for a lot of Kashmiris, it's a colonized territory.
Okay, before I wrap up, give me a sense of how the Indian media reports Kashmir.
Well, they report it as the agents of the Indian state. So they have to become the PR of the Indian state. They have to highlight the good things and
are there any good things happening there?
Yeah, the good things like opening up a school or opening up a road and a bus stop, and sending some Kashmiri kids to India to see the Taj Mahal and witness the greatness of the Taj Mahal and the Indian secular society, which we don't see in Kashmir and even in India anymore. So
there have been a lot of a plethora of TV channels. And they seem to vie with each other for television rating points. And most of these channels, since it's an occupational hazard and we have to monitor them, they are extremely anti-Pakistan at one level, and they also consider Kashmir as a problem between India and Pakistan rather than a problem of Kashmiri right to self-determination.
Well, they don't even consider it a problem anymore. They say there's nothing like that. There's no problem in Kashmir. There's nothing happening. Nobody's getting killed. Nobody's getting blinded. Nobody's getting raped. It's a myth that in Kashmir nothing is happening. So that's how they are trying to show the Kashmir on Indian media. And in 2008, what started as when they started calling protesters as agitation terrorists, now they are calling them terrorists now. So that's a level of dehumanization, the process that has undergone over the past decade. So what I think is that if tomorrow in Kashmir there's a genocide that happens, there will be a lot of Indian media channels who will not only justify it, but also celebrate it as an act of honor and an act of nationalism for the Indian state against these so-called terrorists.
My God, that's really the horrific situation in occupied Kashmir. Was Mohammed Faisal talking to us. Thank you so much for giving us your perspective. This essentially was an attempt to look at the societal and ideological changes. There have been a number of reports from within India talking about pressure on the media. Faisal just talked about how media actually reports or non-reports events in occupied Kashmir. So there is a lot of cause for concern in terms of these internal developments in India. As far as the Pakistan-India relations are concerned, as we determined, nothing is going to change until perhaps after the Indian general elections. This is all for today. We shall see you next week. Until then, it's goodbye.